My name is Scarlett Martinez. I'm 29, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the one people rely on, the planner, the listener, the quiet anchor in everyone's storm. I like control, not in a rigid way, but because life has taught me that preparation prevents heartbreak. I thought I had everything under control with Richard Wilson, my boyfriend of 3 years. Charming, smart, dependable, or so I told myself. We had what most people would call a perfect relationship. Our evenings were calm, our weekends balanced, our conversations thoughtful. But perfection, I've learned, often masks hidden currents, subtle undertows, the sort you don't notice until you're being pulled under. Richard's mother, Evelyn Jones, was always present, always asking questions, giving advice, complimenting my career choices, my ambition, my meticulous planning. I tried to see it as pride, as concern, but there was a sharpness in her attention, a way she'd look at me that made me feel measured, weighed, and quietly judged. And then there was Miranda, Richard's ex-girlfriend. She wasn't in our daily lives, not really, but her shadow lingered. Photos on social media, little comments Richard never noticed, or pretended not to notice. I tried to ignore it, but my instincts hummed a warning. It was during one of our celebratory dinners that the first real alarm bell rang. We were at an upscale restaurant, linen napkins, delicate silverware, the kind of place where every detail is curated to impress. We were celebrating a big professional win of mine, a promotion that came with a substantial bonus. Richard swirled his wine, smiling, that easy, effortless smile. "Scarlett, you're incredible. I don't know what I'd do without you," he said, leaning in closer. I smiled politely, brushing off the compliment. Team effort, I thought, but he wasn't letting me off. "No, really," he said, his eyes locking on mine. "I don't need to worry about the future. Your career, your earnings, they're our security." The words slid off his tongue like a joke, light and airy, but the gleam in his eyes told a different story, hard, possessive, calculating. The same glint I had noticed in Evelyn's gaze at family dinners, in the way she'd casually ask about my savings or my investments. I froze, just for a second. Then my mind began to assemble the puzzle pieces. The way Richard had subtly commented on my bonus last month, the little digs about what's fair for both of us, whenever a new expense came up, the way Evelyn had once suggested I consider sacrifices for family harmony. Everything clicked. I nodded, smiled back, keeping my expression calm, neutral. The rest of the dinner blurred around me, but in my mind, a plan began to form. Not for work, not for deadlines, for my life. The next morning, I woke early, ostensibly to attend an important work meeting. But I didn't go to the office. I met with a financial advisor I trusted, someone who specialized in protecting assets for people in situations like mine. I explained the scenario calmly, the conversations I'd overheard, the subtle pressures, the possessive undertones. He listened quietly, then leaned back, folding his hands. "There's a way to protect your assets, Chen," he said. "It's called an irrevocable trust. You transfer ownership of your premarital assets to the trust. Legally, they no longer belong to you. They can't be touched in a divorce or legal dispute." I felt a rush of relief, not triumph, not satisfaction, relief. Relief that I could safeguard the future I had worked so hard to build without sacrificing the people I cared about. By Friday, the trust was active. My savings, my bonus, the emergency fund I'd spent years building, all moved out of reach, untouchable. The beneficiary? My younger sister. The realization hit me quietly, like a wave brushing my ankles before it becomes a storm. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about survival. When I told Richard about the prenup, I kept my voice calm, gentle. "Richard, with the wedding approaching, I think it's wise for us to formalize a prenup. Just a standard document to protect both of us. My lawyer can draft it." His face tightened immediately. "A prenup? Scarlett, don't you trust me?" I smiled, soft but firm. "Of course I do. This isn't about trust. It's about responsibility, and it protects you too." Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "Scarlett, this seems unnecessary. You're moving too fast." I let her worry hang in the air. I had seen this dance before. Control, manipulation, subtle intimidation. All of it, predictable, and now, irrelevant. The prenup meeting was set for the following week. My lawyer, Ms. Albright, knew everything about the trust. Richard, Evelyn, and Miranda thought they were walking into a negotiation. In reality, they were walking into a revelation. The evening before, I sat alone, quietly reviewing the paperwork. My hands rested over the documents, as though drawing strength from the pages themselves. I felt a pang of sadness. This wasn't how I wanted things to be. Love was supposed to be trust, not calculation. But sometimes, love isn't enough. Sometimes you have to build a fortress around yourself and let the walls do the talking. I poured a glass of wine, staring at my reflection in the window. Outside, the city lights twinkled, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me, inside the world I had carefully constructed. I whispered to myself, "This is just the beginning." The next few days were a blur of quiet observation. Scarlett Martinez, 28, normally meticulous and controlled, found herself listening with new intensity to every word, every glance from Richard, Evelyn, and even Miranda, who seemed to appear in conversation more often than I expected. I started noticing the patterns, the little probes, the casual questions about my savings, my career, and my future plans. Nothing direct, nothing overt, yet every word was loaded. At dinner one night, Richard said, "It's amazing how much you've accomplished, Scarlett. I just want to make sure we're secure together." He leaned back, smiling faintly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. My mind raced. Secure together. In that phrasing, there was a subtle assumption. The word together sounded harmless, yet it implied a claim, an expectation that my future and my hard-earned assets were part of his domain. Evelyn's questions were sharper. "You're thinking about that bonus, right? It's such a clever sum to save. Have you thought about investing it in us?" Her tone was sugary, but beneath it was a precise edge, a probe, and Miranda's presence, though absent physically, lingered through stories Richard told, social media posts he referenced, subtle comparisons, reminders of what he'd shared with her in the past. I realized then that this was no ordinary courtship of hearts. It was a calculated push to insert themselves into my life, into my finances, into my autonomy. I couldn't let them. The following morning, I made an appointment with Ms. Harlan, the financial advisor who specialized in protecting assets for people in complex relational situations. I arrived, calm on the surface, but internally a whirlwind. I laid out the situation. Subtle pressure, strategic probing, the looming wedding, and Richard's unsettling comment about my bonus being our security. He listened carefully, nodding. "You need to move quickly," he said. "You're thinking about love, but you also need to think about logistics. An irrevocable trust would secure your premarital assets. Legally, once assets are in the trust, they are no longer yours. They can't be divided in divorce or claimed by anyone else. Not your fiancé, not family, not an ex. It's a fortress." I let the words sink in. Fortress. That's exactly what I needed. Not vengeance, not punishment. Just protection. By Friday, the process was complete. My savings, my emergency fund, my stock portfolio, all moved into the trust. My younger sister was the beneficiary. The sense of control returned, steadier than I'd felt in months. Yet a quiet pang lingered in my chest. I was building walls between myself and someone I loved, or thought I did. Love should have been enough, but the world had proven otherwise. The next step was the prenup conversation. I approached it with the same calm I had approached the trust, steady, controlled, deliberate. "Richard," I said one evening, voice soft but firm, "I think it's wise for us to formalize a prenup. It's standard. It protects both of us. My lawyer can draft it." His smile faltered. "A prenup? Scarlett, do you not trust me?" I met his gaze evenly. "I trust you. This isn't about trust. It's about responsibility. It protects you as much as me." Evelyn's lips pressed together, and her hand rested lightly on the table as if steadying herself. "Scarlett, I think you're overcomplicating things," she said. "This could make things uncomfortable." I let her words hover in the air. They were irrelevant. The trust was already in place. I held the cards. They didn't know it yet. Richard's tone shifted, a faint edge creeping into his charm. "I guess if you feel it's necessary." He trailed off, and I could see him mentally recalculating, weighing strategies, testing reactions. I smiled calmly. That smile was my armor. Inside, my thoughts ran 1,000 calculations. If they push, I will respond. If they demand, I have the legal backing. If they manipulate, I will not yield. Over the next few days, subtle tests emerged. Evelyn asked pointed questions about investment strategy. Miranda appeared in conversation again, her name used as a casual comparison to how she'd handle things differently. Each probe, each comment, only reinforced the necessity of my preparation. One evening, alone in my apartment, I reviewed the trust documents. My hands traced the edges of the pages as if drawing strength from them. I realized something crucial. Love wasn't enough to shield yourself in a world where entitlement masquerades as affection. Sometimes love requires strategy. Sometimes it requires building walls that even the people closest to you cannot breach. A quiet resolve settled in me. The prenup meeting was approaching, and they thought it would be a negotiation. They had no idea it would be a revelation. The trust wasn't just a legal safeguard, it was a signal, a quiet, impenetrable boundary that said, "This is mine. Respect it, or be forced to confront consequences." As the city lights flickered outside my window, I took a deep breath. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. Whatever came next, whatever Richard, Evelyn, or Miranda threw at me, I would meet it with precision, calm, and the foresight I had cultivated over a lifetime. This was no longer just about love. This was about survival. The day of the prenup meeting arrived with the quiet tension of a storm about to break. I walked into Ms. Albright's office, my heart steady, my expression calm. Richard was there, his smile a little too practiced, Evelyn by his side, ever the shadowy presence, and Miranda, his ex, appearing once again, her poised confidence masking a subtle hunger for control. They thought this would be a negotiation, a battle of words, a chance to tip the scales in their favor. They had no idea it was a revelation, a calculated unveiling of every step I had taken to protect my life, my assets, my future. Gary, their lawyer, a smooth-talking man with a penchant for theatrics, began the meeting. "We've received the draft prenup," he said, sliding a folder across the polished table. "It's quite restrictive. Scarlett is giving up significant assets to secure her own future. We believe Richard should have access to them." I didn't flinch. My hands rested on the table, calm, steady. Ms. Albright leaned forward, her presence like steel. "Gary, thank you, but there's a critical piece of information here that you need to understand." She explained the irrevocable trust. Every word was clear, precise, devastating. The majority of my net worth, my savings, my investments, the emergency fund, was no longer mine. It belonged to the trust. It could never be considered marital property, never touched, never leveraged. Richard's face shifted from confident charm to disbelief. Evelyn's brow furrowed, a flicker of panic beneath her composed exterior. Miranda's carefully curated poise cracked, revealing the first sliver of true emotion. Anger, perhaps fear. "So what does this mean?" Evelyn demanded, voice sharp. "In English, just tell me." Ms. Albright's gaze was icy. "It means the assets are off the table, permanently. The prenup only applies to future earnings, which Scarlett is willing to divide fairly, as any responsible partner would." The silence was deafening. Richard opened his mouth, then shut it. His jaw tightened. Miranda's hands clenched slightly on the table. I could see their calculations scrambling, their plans unraveling. "You did what?" Richard finally hissed. His voice was low, dangerous. "I secured my assets," I said evenly, my calm a deliberate contrast to the storm of emotion around me. "For long-term security. For both of us, if necessary." Evelyn's face turned red with frustration. "You moved them so he couldn't access them?" "Yes," I replied simply. "The trust is irrevocable." Gary spluttered, flustered. This is highly irregular. It could be seen as hiding assets." Ms. Albright cut him off sharply. "It is legal. Registered. Transparent. Scarlett is not hiding anything. She's protecting what is hers before the final agreement is signed." Richard's eyes narrowed. "So, this changes everything," he said, the edge in his voice betraying panic masked as reason. "Exactly," I said quietly. My calm, steady voice now carried weight. "If we're going to be a team, we need clarity, boundaries, respect. This ensures fairness, accountability, and transparency for both of us." Evelyn's control snapped. "A team? You've tricked her. You've manipulated her," she screamed. You let her plan this life thinking it was mutual while pulling the rug from under her. The room erupted. Miranda's voice joined in, icy and cutting. You've stolen her future, Scarlett. How could you do this? I remained seated, composed. My eyes met Richard's for a moment. There was hatred there now, pure and unfiltered. But I felt no fear, only clarity, only the quiet satisfaction of inevitability. Undo it, Richard whispered, almost pleading. You can't. It's irrevocable, I said, firm. No argument, no justification, just fact. The meeting ended with them storming out, leaving behind a swirl of anger, frustration, and disbelief. I sat with Ms. Albright, listening to the echo of their footsteps fade, a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over me. Afterwards, the fallout began almost immediately. Calls, texts, and furious emails arrived in waves. Richard, Evelyn, and Miranda, each attempting to manipulate, threaten, or guilt me into reversing the trust or bending the prenup. But I was prepared. Every document, every transaction, every legal step was documented meticulously. Their attempts to create chaos bounced harmlessly against the fortress I had built. Even a confrontation at my apartment couldn't shake my resolve. Richard came once, trying to reclaim control, to intimidate, to plead. He held the hand-carved wooden birds that had been my grandfather's, each one a memory, a fragment of my childhood, priceless to me, and demanded them back. I met his gaze steadily. Not without a guarantee, he said, a feint at negotiation. Leave, I said, voice dangerously low, now, or I will call the police. His face faltered. He wasn't expecting that. He dropped the birds and left. I changed the locks the next day, a quiet ritual of reclaiming my space, my boundaries, my life. The storm had not yet ended, but I had survived the first deluge, and for the first time in months, I felt the faintest glimmer of peace. Not joy, not triumph, just the calm that comes from knowing you are finally in control of your own story. The days after the prenup meeting felt surreal. Silence fell over my apartment, punctuated only by the soft hum of the city outside. It was the kind of quiet that presses in, demanding reflection. I sat on my sofa, my hands folded over a cup of tea, letting the calm seep in. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel something besides vigilance, relief. But the storm wasn't over. Messages and calls poured in, alternating between rage, pleas, and frantic attempts to manipulate. Evelyn's voice left a voicemail that was 3 minutes long, shrieking about ruined lives, stolen futures, and betrayal. Richard sent texts, some angry, some pleading, none acknowledging the trust or the prenup. Miranda, ever calculating, tried to weave herself back into the narrative, offering sympathy, veiled criticism, and subtle threats. I ignored them all. My strategy was simple. Let the law and the truth speak louder than emotion. Certified mail became my ally. Formal letters went to every wedding vendor they had tried to bind me to. Florists, caterers, the venue, the string quartet, even the ice sculptor they had impulsively added to the package. Each letter was clear, precise, legally airtight. I was no longer engaged. I was not a signatory on any contracts, and any remaining financial responsibility rested solely on those who had signed the agreements, Richard and Evelyn. The responses were almost immediate. Vendors who had once sent polite reminders now demanded payment directly from them, the panic evident in their calls and emails. The carefully constructed narrative of me as a schemer, a villain, and a manipulator began to crumble under the weight of facts, evidence, and meticulous documentation. A week later, the first real consequences landed. Richard's father, a quiet, worn man I had always pitied for his meekness under Evelyn's dominance, called me. His voice trembled. "Scarlett, you have to call them off," he pleaded. "They're getting letters from collection agencies. The venue is threatening liens. Diana's. I mean, Evelyn, she charged deposits on our home equity card. They're going to lose everything if this keeps up." I felt a pang of pity, brief and controlled. "They made those choices," I said calmly. "The contracts were signed by them. That's the consequence. I've already informed the vendors who is legally responsible." The relief in his voice was tangible, but fleeting. Behind it, the tension of two lives unraveling under their own schemes hung like a storm cloud. Then came the final gesture of acknowledgement, or perhaps surrender. A package arrived, no note, only the carefully wrapped wooden birds of my grandfather. Every single one, unharmed. Nestled alongside them was the engagement ring, accompanied by a cashier's check for its full value. I inspected each bird, letting memories of my childhood and my grandfather wash over me. The ring, no longer a symbol of love or betrayal, was now simply a formality, a closure. Through a mutual friend, I learned that the aftermath had been catastrophic for them. Evelyn had to sell her luxury SUV. Richard was working multiple jobs, exhausted and embittered. Miranda had retreated, humiliated, her carefully curated social circle shrinking under the weight of their failures. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt quiet. The wooden bird sat on my mantelpiece now, a silent testament, not of victory, not of revenge, but of resilience, foresight, and the careful planning that keeps your life, your memories, and your future intact. Sometimes the smartest move isn't a fight. It's the quiet, calculated fortification of what is yours, knowing that those who attempt to breach it will ultimately face the consequences of their own choices. I had lost 2 years and a future I thought I wanted, but I had preserved my life's work and my grandfather's legacy. And for someone like me, a planner, a protector, a strategist, I could live with that. In the end, it wasn't love or patience that solved this. It was precision, calm, and the foresight to prepare for every eventuality. And for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace.